Hello and welcome back to Mind Body Relationship Podcast, where we talk about the mind, the body, and the relationship. My name is Emerald Hill. If you want to introduce yourselves.
Yes, of course. I'm Kate. I'm the special guest on the podcast today. I am a student at the Counselling House until next month, actually.
I know.
And I think I will give the floor to you.
This is what happens with a student. Anyway, oh dear. Kate has been doing her practicum with us for the last 8 months. And you're almost done, right?
I am almost done.
Almost done.
Yes.
Officially completing Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology through Yorkville University.
That's right.
That's right, yeah. So my name is, of course, Dr. Laurie Ponsford-Hill. I am a clinical supervisor here at the Counselling House, as well as many other things that I do. And so today what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be talking about eating disorders. We're also going to be talking about Kate's experience for what it is that actually really brings her to becoming a counselor.
Correct.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
How much of an impact do you think like an invalidating environment has in regards to an eating disorder?
That's an amazing question. Big time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I think that especially as young people, we don't necessarily recognize what we're saying to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And by young people, I mean, like 16, right? Like, when I started to develop my symptoms and, like there's already so much insecurity in my peers and in me, obviously, and for me to be losing weight and my peers, to call me names in regards to that skinniness, and for, them to have, instead of a supportive approach to conversing with me after I've told them, to be dismissive or to be, in a way, like jealous, sickly jealous of the weight loss,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so, even in my home, like, I don't think it's something my dad really understood at all. So, that not necessarily having, and I must say, as the person suffering, right, like, you're responsible for reaching out, of course, but when you're young and you're not necessarily used to, reaching out that hand, it doesn't come as easy. So to not have, at the beginning at least, a really good network of people who are supportive, who are not dismissive of the situation at all, and who are not looking to gain at all in terms of your suffering, because there are unfortunately people that don't necessarily recognize the further damage that they're doing in the things that they say when you are presenting an issue.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So it sounds like there was like a modeling that took place for you, a modeling of constriction.
Definitely.
And so you just took that modeling.
Exactly.
And as opposed to being able, just because of age and stage or whatever it was that was happening for you in regards to emotion,
yes,
shove the emotion down.
Exactly. A little timeline, about age 16 is when I really started to develop the symptoms. It started with the death of a friend, alongside starting work as a waitress. Now, I was grieving my friend, but at the same time, not taking care of myself as I was working full-time in the summer. So I was naturally losing some weight. I had some comments on it, and essentially I recognized how that little bit of food intake kind of numbed out a lot of the feelings that I had been experiencing with the loss of my friend. So that is how essentially it all began. It was anorexia nervosa at first. So there's 4 main types of eating disorders. Anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, those are the 2 that are more mainstream that we hear about most.
Mm-hmm.
Binge eating disorder. And I'm not sure if it's still in the DSM, but ETNOS, eating disorder not otherwise specified, was another diagnosis at least several years ago. So I had anorexia nervosa for about 2.5 years. And at that point, I was losing weight, but more than anything, it was just an obsessive desire to restrict what I was eating, to completely numb myself out. So lost my period, that's a big part of it, lost reproductive function, really lost a lot of cognitive ability, was in high school, so was still trying to get straight A's, which add to the obsessive component of the whole ordeal. And then about halfway through grade 12, I discovered, as I call it, bulimia. So essentially, you know, with anorexia, you have binges often, or I did at least. It's going to manifest in different ways for different people. So I would restrict throughout the day, and then at nighttime, I would usually binge. So I try to keep my calories at about 500, which is not enough for a body by any means. And so at nighttime, I would binge. And that one night that I binged and decided to try to get rid of it, I discovered the release that essentially vomiting up my food afforded me, which was then an addiction of its own for 4 years or so. So during this time, I had graduated high school. I had started to tell people that I was concerned about my eating, my behavior, my physical symptoms. You know, like I lost 50 pounds or so. Again, reproductive function wasn't there. I was not by any means functioning the way that my parents and friends knew me to normally function. But I'm from a small town, so it was a very seldom heard of disease, I would say. Like, it's not necessarily that it's uncommon, but it's very hush-hush.
Right.
Small town, conservative, you know, that type of thing, swept under the rug. So by the time I was then in university, it was worsening and worsening because I had the freedom to, you know, not be supervised by parents and friends, and but it was at that point that I decided to start seeking help. So I was at University of Guelph. They have great resources there. So I was with Trellis Mental Health in the outpatient program. We did group, we did individual, we did family therapy, and I was very slowly making progress. So in anorexia recovery, normally you first start with mechanical eating. So that's just to basically get you back into routine and to gain a little bit of weight and to make sure that your body is getting what it needs.
Right.
And that as well, that's going to break the cycle of numbing. So it's at that point that you're then, you know, exposed to the emotion that you have been numbing, and then you're able to treat the underlying, whatever the issue is that's building the foundation for the eating disorder. So mechanical eating and all of these therapeutic interventions were really helpful, but it took about, I would say, 4 years of pretty intensive treatment to get to the other side when I was actually feeling okay.
Wow, that is a long time.
It was a long time.
Yeah.
It was no fun. Don't get me wrong, I had lots of fun in university, but this part of it, not my favorite. But very important, right? Like, in that process. So I should mention as well, I had quite significant depression and suicidality when I was mechanically eating, because this was again when those feelings were kind of coming up to the surface after having been stuffed. So I had been put on antidepressants for a short period of time. For me, that was not an intervention that was suitable. Like, the suicidality increased significantly within the first couple weeks of taking them.
Right.
So I was taken off them and kind of explored different types of therapy. So I've always been an athlete, and during, you know, my times of not necessarily eating enough, I had to abandon a lot of the activity that I would normally engage in, just because it's, you know, burning more calories, and that's the last thing that a doctor wants you to be doing when you're trying to gain back the weight. So I started to exercise again, and that of course led to occasionally using that as a purging behavior in the bulimia. So it was reestablishing that type of balance of exercise and nutrition and social well-being, because that's another thing about an eating disorder, is that it completely isolates you socially. Re-exploring spiritual outlets that I had really neglected. So for me, music, nature, I identify the universe as my God, so that's exploring that avenue through Jungian psychology, and this is all basically what started the stew of my interest in psychology in general. So I switched my major in university, in my undergrad, to psychology, and that was really an opportunity for me to explore the way that this, obsession, like why it was manifesting for me, and it's going to be different for different people. Obviously, it's more common in younger females, but it's definitely can happen at any age, and it can happen to boys as well. There's a big sexual abuse component normally to eating disorders, especially bulimia. There's all of these little components. Self-esteem is very low, and it's just the relationship with your body, your femininity. For me, I was always a bit of a tomboy, so when I, during puberty, developed a lot of my female characteristics, that was hard for me, because it was kind of the slap in the face of recognition that as an athlete, I'm not quite going to go in the direction that a boy could, I guess. So all these different reasons as to why, this stew led me to developing an eating disorder. There's this relationship with my femininity that has not been addressed for years, and I think a lot of that has manifested as menstrual problems, and it's it's kind of metaphysical, so it's not something a doctor has ever told me, but the way that I have the relationship with my menstrual cycle is still not ideal. So that's been the work now, is finally just like catching up after 10 years of healing, and catching up and trying to just sit with what is, right? So meditation and yoga and acceptance work, things like that. And actually a lot of this work that I'm doing now with clients, that is the static feminine, right? Like you're sitting quietly and listening and you're holding space. So even in the last 8 months, so many changes have happened.
Amazing.
Yes, it is.
Well, I think that what's really important to have a conversation about is the upcoming weekend retreat that we're going to be putting together in regards to eating disorders.
Yes.
Right? So that, I think, is really important, because that too will bring you full circle in regards to where it is that you started and where it is that you are now.
Of course.
Right? Bringing together all of your experiences and therefore wisdom that you've gained along the way in order to be able to help others, right, come to terms with what it is that that's about, right? Because it's a combination of not only what it is that's going on in the mind, but what it is that, of course, the body speaks, right? And the relationship not only between the two, but what's happening outside as well as inside, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Not only how we look at ourselves, but how it is that we, see ourselves outside, and how it is that we see other people perceive us, right? So it's the combination of all of those aspects. And it's complicated.
It's so complicated.
Very much so.
But it's, so we're going to run a retreat, and it's going to basically be centered mostly around mind-body connection and giving up the obsessive control that a lot of women face when it comes to dieting. Like so many people are constantly recycling diets and they're not working for them, and they're exercising too much often, and they have a very negative relationship with their bodies. So this retreat's going to focus on reconnecting with the body, psychoeducation about what it is that your body needs, in terms of caloric intake and the different types of
food fixations.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so that's going to hopefully run this summer. We're going to get that organized.
Yes.
And yeah, we're going to hopefully get a little bit of activity going in that retreat as well, just to further establish the whole mind-body connection.
That's right, exactly.
But yeah, you know, it's so cemented in so many women that they're not necessarily supposed to have a loving relationship with their body.
Yeah.
So balancing that control and comfort, right?
Exactly.
Which is, you know, the control was the anorexic side of my story, and the comfort was the purging and the bulimia. So it's just obviously not to that extreme, but in terms of just the way that women treat themselves on a daily basis, right? Like just finding that balance and trying to help women feel that connection instead of feeling just going through life in such a disconnect.
Removed way.
Yes.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for
It's been a
participating with
slice.
us today. Yes, it's been fabulous. And if you would like to participate in our retreat, please contact us, and we will have the information up for you so that you can know exactly how you can get in contact with us and when it's running and the particulars and that sort of thing. So thank you, Emerald, for participating as well.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that's great. Yes. And then we'll be talking about the other side of eating disorders. One is to do with constriction. The other one is to do with excessive.
Yeah.
Right? And so we'll be talking about that at another time.